I'm going to do a quick book review of Chris Hedges' Empire of Illusion. I just finished the audiobook and really enjoyed it. So this was written in about, I think, 2010, and it was focused on the economic collapse that had happened over the previous couple of years and radical social changes that seemed like they might be happening. Overall, I'd say it's certainly quite a depressing book, as you would expect from the apocalyptic drama. And I'll admit personally, at a certain point, I become a little desensitized and annoyed by these doom and gloom authors. Constantly predicting the next collapse and the final end of the American empire. We're now in 2021 and have survived much crazier shit than they had in 2010, and somehow we're still chugging along. And I was thinking about this, and I do wonder at times if maybe this is simply the state that we will always be in, and maybe have always been in. It's a constant, perpetual collapse. Think of it like a waterfall, where it's always going over the edge, but it never stops. However, he covers a number of very interesting topics in the book that I really appreciate, and it starts out with the WWF, WWE, professional wrestling, which I think is really an underappreciated and under-discussed aspect of American culture that is really prescient, and it really wasn't talked about enough with Trump. You'll see a lot of kind of hints and predictions, which is real nice after the fact, of a Trumpian-like figure in the future from Chris Hedges. But his discussions around professional wrestling, I think, are very important, and the spectacle, the simplicity of relationships and of good and evil is really the understanding of that is what is the brilliance of Vince McMahon, and is what has made him and made wrestling so successful. The absolute hate for the heel or the bad guy, and the love of the good guy, and really just how easy it is to manipulate the crowds and make them cheer or hate for someone, is very good. And he moves from there into another aspect of our culture that I think is incredibly important and not discussed enough, and it's pornography, and how it affects the pretty much everyone who's a consumer of it. The horrible, truly evil industry, and how it exploits particularly young women, and what it does to them, and what it does to people who consume it. And I am by no means anti pornography. I'm very pro, but there's a horrible dark side to the industry, and it's not covered up. It's not covered enough, and I think it affects people. If you're not aware of what it's a business, and you're simply a consumer, and if you're not aware of that dynamic, and how they are trying to manipulate you in various different ways, I think it can have a pernicious effect without the consumer really ever knowing or understanding that. What else did he discuss? Another point he touched on. These are all really interesting, and I always felt like these are really key aspects to understanding American culture that no one seems to acknowledge or even be aware of, and that's what I really enjoyed about it. But the other issue he talks about is positive psychology, and again, you want to talk about Trump? He's got the wrestling background. He's got the porn background in some ways. He's also, if you read biographies on Trump, was a big fan of positive psychology. He and his father were followers of Norman Vincent Peale, the art of positive thinking. He was essentially a church. He had a church that they would attend, and it's his mode of thinking and looking at the world was very present in a Trump psyche and communication. And it's a horrible, poisonous, false psychology. And basically the idea is if you're unhappy, it's your fault. It's something in your head. It's not the world around you. It's not society. It's not your job. It's not your boss. It's not our culture. It's not our lack of a social safety net. It's not a poisonous society that turns everyone against each other. It's you. You simply have to think positive thoughts and tell yourself that things will be okay. And who benefits from people being convinced like that? Well, obviously the people who are in charge, your bosses and the people running the government, the wealthy people of society. So he breaks that down really well. I've again, this is something I woke up to. I don't want to say woke up to. I kind of became aware of. I've always enjoyed it. I think it's pretty popular. This idea of positive psychology. It's you'll find it in things like The Secret, in all of I forget some of the names, but like starting in the 1950s. Although it's self-help. A lot of self-help is really just based off of this bullshit positive psychology. But it's really, really harmful, because if you're truly suffering from something, whether it's a mental illness or whether it's your economic circumstances, your social circumstances, these are real issues that oftentimes can be corrected, and there are real approaches to helping you. But this idea of telling yourself that no, you just need to think positive thoughts and you just need to will it into existence actually makes it worse. He talks about institutions of higher learning and how they've been corrupted and essentially just serve the economic corporate state. Really interesting there as well. He tends to drone on at times. One of the reviews I had read, I thought was a somewhat fair critique, especially if you haven't grown up in the America of wrestling and pornography. There's a good fifth of the book is I don't know, it's that much. A good portion of the book is him just quoting scripts from pornographic movies. But it can be a bit shocking, and it's like, why is he doing this in a book? I think if I was reading it, I would probably have put the book down. I was like, he's just filling it up with fluff, which is the benefit of audiobooks. It helps you get through crap portions of books. But it's actually a really good point, because when you sit back and think about it and look at this, you're like, wow, this is really harmful stuff. And it does affect us, just like The other thing he talks about with wrestling that I think is absolutely ridiculous that we deny this is that violence in movies and video games in our culture, we're bombarded with it constantly. Um, this notion that it doesn't affect people and it doesn't make children violent and men violent and women violent, everyone violent, um, is absolutely ridiculous. And I think it'll come out eventually that the scientific proof and um, uh, studies that show that it has no correlation are just like the cigarette industry or the fossil fuel industry. And it's just people who are paid off because it's a huge, huge, huge fucking industry. So much money in video games and media. It's graphic. Overall, I don't care about reviews, but sometimes it's interesting. I'd recommend the book if any of those areas interest you. Chris Hedges is a pretty great author. He's he's legit in my book, in my opinion. Aside from winning a Pulitzer, which could mean he's great, could mean nothing. By the way, this book did not win the Pulitzer, but what authors do, if you win a Pulitzer, you put winner of the Pulitzer Prize under your name, and then you put it on your other 20 books that may be pieces of shit. And I don't think most people realize that. Chris Hedges is great. He was a priest, Methodist, Jesuit, I forget. And he was in Central America in the 80s during the horrible CIA wars that were conducted there in Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua. In the 90s, he was in Yugoslavia and Bosnia, and as a war reporter, and was really in the midst of all the shit, and was there for years. Truly, amongst the most admirable reporters. He's very radical, very left wing, but very erudite, and he writes really well. And I think the measure of a book like this, a social critique, is how does it line up 10 years, 20 years down the road? 20 is probably the best. But I would say 10 years after this was written, it holds up very well. And a lot of what he's talked about, I think has proved to be right. He doesn't dive into it, and I think he has another book on it that I'm excited to read. But he says that when totalitarianism comes to America, it's going to be led by populist quote unquote reporters, like your Fox News, your Tucker Carlson, your Donald Trump type people who are really just characters. He also does a great job. He talks about the war. He talks about the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war, and the utter failure of anyone in the media to hold the government accountable. But he says it's going to be led by people like those types of demagogues in coalition with the Christian fascists, which again I'm excited to read his book on that, because that is something that people just do not acknowledge, and is incredibly scary and dangerous. Their power and their goals in this country. But it's pretty fun to read after in the post Donald Trump era, however long this may last. So check it out and comment if you have any other thoughts on the book. I would recommend if you like reading print and audio, I think this is a good book for audio. I don't think I'd have made it through it if I had tried Kindle. So enjoy.